my link earlier on this pattern. It's a mommy and me version of a tote bag. There's a larger one, a smaller one. This is the larger one. I've cut everything out already and started to prepare some stuff so it doesn't take as long. So the main thing you need are for the large one, you need two 17 by 17 inch squares. Okay, and this writing is a certain direction. So you're going to have to cut out your corners, 2 inches out of each corner. I have a ruler mat, which makes it easy. So just make sure your writing is going this way when you're doing that. You also need the same size pieces for a lining, which I've already sewed the lining together. You also need 2 pieces for the pocket if you want 2 pockets. I know some people that have tote bags, the pocket's just on one side, either the front or back. This one is requiring 2, but you could definitely make it without 2. You could make it with just 1, or you could skip the pocket altogether. So that's what you need 2 12.5 by 6 inch rectangles. And then you need 2 strips that are 56, I believe, 56 by 3. Mine are a little skinnier. I had I think they're called a jelly roll of these strips from something I had done before. So I just sewed some of them together and then cut it to make 56 because 1 was too short and 2 was too long. So I just sewed them together here to make one long piece. And my whole rest of my jelly roll disappeared somewhere. It's so weird. I only have this small area, but I don't know what I did with them. So we're going to get started. So the first thing you need to do is start with your pockets. So I've already done one, so I'm just going to show you the other. This part does not have to be exact, so I would not measure this. I've been doing this every time I make a mask, so I just do it super quick. So you want to double fold at one of the short ends. So basically just fold it, do a little finger press, press that, and then fold it one more time. If you like to be exact, you could fold it a 1/2 inch and then another 1/2 inch, but it honestly doesn't matter because it's just the top of the pocket. Okay, once you get done with that, then you need to sew that hem at the top. So I'm gonna just make sure that my needle's on that section. No need to back stitch because you're actually gonna cover both ends with the strap. So we're just gonna sew along there. If you want to move your needle position so that you can be lined up with the ruler or the edge of the presser foot, you can do that too. And again, no need to back stitch because the ends are going to be covered with the ends of the straps. So then you're going to come over here. So again, 17 by 17, you want to cut 2-inch squares out of each corner. That's going to make basically the bottom corners of the bag. So this goes, it should be 3.5 inches in from the cut corners. So 3.5 inches, then you have 3.5 inches over there. Just make sure it's straight and flat. I'm not going to pin this because I'm going to be pinning it in a minute once I get my strap done. So then you're going to take your strip, and again, I had to sew mine together, so I'm going to fold it with the right sides touching, and then I'm going to sew this and then turn it right side out. So I'm going to move my needle all the way over to the right so that I get a small seam allowance. So this will be a wider strap. If you do 3 inches, it'll be a little wider. And I'm just gonna, so I am gonna back stitch this one because I don't, whoops, it's gonna get caught. I don't want it to come out when I go to turn it. Sometimes when you sew all the way to the edge, it gets caught down in there. So I'm gonna start a little further, back stitch just a little bit. Now I'm second guessing what I did. Oh, I think on the other one I actually had my needle in the middle position, so let me change it so that they're the same. So I'm going to have my needle in the middle position. So this will be about a 3/8 inch seam. And then I don't pin this or anything. I just make sure that this jagged edge is matched up with each other. And then I'm just making sure that the pointy parts are on the edge of the presser foot. Every once in a while, just reposition. And I'm not pulling it too hard. I'm just trying to hold it in place. My finger's doing funky things. It's spasming. It's not happy with me right now. It's been yelling at me a lot. When you get, if you have to sew two pieces together like I did, just make sure that the seams are open and that they're sitting flat. That'll help you whenever you go to turn it. And I did want that seam to be in the center of the strap, so I sewed two pieces together and then cut off. I placed the seam at the end and then measured from there so it would be in the middle. It doesn't have to be in the middle, but I wanted it to look nicer. So again, I'm just using my fingers to guide it through. These jelly rolls are nice, and a lot of people that quilt use them. Okay, so when you get to the end, make sure you backstitch just a couple stitches and take that out. Now we need to turn this inside out. So there's all sorts of tools you can use. I use a safety pin. So I take a safety pin, put it in the fold about 1/2 inch from the edge. Secure the safety pin, and then I push the safety pin down in, and then you pull the scrunched part up over the edge. You have to stop every once in a while and do that, otherwise you'll get like a big knot at the end, and then it's not going to turn inside out. It's going to get stuck. This is the easiest way, I think, to turn things. Although, like I said, there are fancy tools and stuff, but this is the way that I've done it for a really long time. So every once in a while, just come down here. It does help if you have nails. That darn gel manicure, I finally had to take it off because it was chipping and stuff, and now my nails are all messed up. Breaking. They hurt. So whenever I think it's a good idea to get a gel manicure again, I have to talk myself out of it. So again, I'm just pushing the scrunches over the edge. If you don't want to take the time to do this, you could cut a thicker piece, like a 4-inch wide strip, and then fold the edges into the center and then fold it again, sort of like double fold bias tape. And then you could just top stitch it. But I don't know, I like the way this looks, and all the edges will be finished. So I'm almost done. Once I get my safety pin out the very end, it goes a lot faster. Okay, so my safety pin's out the other end. So now it usually goes faster once the safety pin's out. So you just hold the end that's already turned. And if it gets stuck at all, you just have to come back here and pull. Sometimes it'll get stuck where that seam is in the middle because it's just another layer of fabric in there. Okay. This would be a cute project if you have a kid that wants to learn how to sew. You both could make one. Yours could be a bigger size, theirs could be smaller. Okay, so I'm completely turned right side out. So now I'm going to press it. Now, some people like to press it with the seam on the edge. I personally think it's easier and you get a more uniform pressing if you actually press it with the seam in the middle. So if you look here close, you can see my pieces are attached in the middle. So some people like to do it where their seam is on the edge. So it'd be seam and then fold, but sometimes the fabric gets in the fold and I don't like to do that. So I'm going to press it so it's in the middle. So I'm just going to adjust it a little bit to get it started. And if you can try and open the seam in there, that will actually help as well. Okay, so once that's good, so I'm just going to basically take my iron and I'm going to kind of shimmy it back and forth, trying to keep that seam in the center. And the reason why I'm shimming it is because that'll actually open up the seam allowance. If you don't do that, you can end up pressing it and this will be skinnier than what you need. So by shimming the front of it, you're kind of opening up the seam allowance as you go. And just try and keep it in the center, but even if it's not in the center, this is going to be face down whenever you put your strap on. So nobody would actually probably be able to tell if it's not exact. Steam definitely helps with this. Especially when you're using cotton, steam can press it nice and good. Definitely be careful when you get close to your fingertips. If you're wondering what I'm pressing on, so this mat you can buy in Joann Fabrics and other places. It's what's on an ironing board, but it's just a flat mat. So you can see the bottom underneath there, it's stuck a little bit because of the moisture and the polyurethane. But it allows me to iron in a smaller space, and when I'm doing these masks and they're just small, I really like using this instead of having to keep getting the ironing board out. Okay, so now my strap is nice and flat. So with my seam down, I'm going to center it on the one side of the pocket. So you want the pocket raw edge to be hiding under the strap. So you can measure it if you want to, but just make sure it's in the middle. Again, no one's going to see that. And I'm just going to take a couple pins and pin it on here. And I'm going to put the pins perpendicular to the strap so that when I'm sewing, I can sew pretty close to them and then be able to take them out without having to take them out too soon. So when I'm doing a pocket, I almost always pin pretty close to the top of the pocket just so that it holds the pocket down. And then at the very top, we want to stop about 1 inch from the top of the bag. And that's because we're going to have to sew the bag to the lining. And so you can't have the strap go all the way to the top or the strap will end up on the inside. So I'm going to just use my seam gauge here and put the end of the seam gauge even with the top of the bag. And then I'm going to put my pin, my top pin across where that 1 inch marking is. And that's going to tell me that's where I need to pivot and go across the top. And I'm going to show you how to put an X there just to secure it, because that's, if you're going to get any tear in a bag, that's where you're going to get it, because that's where the handle pulls from it. So once you get one side of it done, you need to start back on the other bottom side so that you're not trying to guess how much should be hanging off the top. So again, seam side goes down, and I'm covering up my pocket. So again, just make sure you're going straight up. And I just want to put about the same amount of pins I have on the other side. This shouldn't move too much on you because they are cotton and they're pretty stable. And it's not like they're going to stretch or anything. But you're going to be moving your bag around when you take it over to sew it. So the last thing you want is this to be moving and then things not get lined up. If you have some threads from sewing across the top of the pocket, make sure they're hiding under there. I'm going to trim this. Since someone's going to get this bag, I need to make sure I do an extra good job. Don't want anybody thinking my work is shoddy. So put one more pin and then I'll measure for the top inch. So now we're ready to sew these straps on. So you're sewing the strap and you're sewing the sides of the pocket all at once. So when we do this, it doesn't matter if you go to the left or the right, because we're going to come up one side, pivot, and come down the other. But you do want to make sure that you're pretty close to the edge when you do this. So I'm going to, let's see, I think I'm going to do, in the middle and then just try and go straight against the edge. You might want to find something to line up with. I was just trying to see what would be best. Okay, so when I sew now, I just want to stay close to the fold and just guide it in. If you notice there starts to be like a little bubble, then that will come out. So just a little bit before you get to a pin, just take the pin out and it'll flatten out. And then when I get to the top where the pin is, I'm going to pivot and go across the top. So I'm going to do a couple more stitches. And then I'm going to, with my needle and the fabric, I'm going to turn it so that I can go straight across the top. And then when I'm close to the edge, I'm going to pivot and now come down the other side. So now you don't have any pins in there anymore because I took them out whenever I was sewing the other side. And then if you want to, you could sew along the bottom. I'm not going to because I'm going to be sewing along the bottom once I sew my pieces together. So now I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. Oops. Where did that go? Oh no, pin somewhere on the floor. If my grandpa was here right now, he'd be having a hard time. He always yelled at my grandma for dropping pins on the ground, or so I heard. So now I'm just gonna go up this side. So the pins help everything to stay in place, especially since your fabric isn't flat during this process. So I'm going to pivot. Oh, and I ran on a bobbin. Darn it. Nothing like sewing and realizing there's no bobbin in there. I'm just going to put any color in for right now because no one's going to see this bobbin, because you're only going to see the outside. So now I gotta go back, so where I left off. So if that happens to you, you just have to go a little bit before where you ended and then overlap it. There's no need to back stitch because when you overlap it, that is the same as back stitching. And I can see the little holes in my fabric, so now I know when to stop. So I'm going to pivot. I'm also going to cut this beginning thread because I don't want it to get caught in there. Pivot, so to the other side. And now I'm going to come back down. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to show you is how to reinforce the top of the straps, because if you don't reinforce them, then you can end up getting a tear. So what I'm going to do is measure an inch down from the stitching across the top and just make a mark, and then I'm going to do a diagonal line connecting the two corners, and we're going to sew an X there, and again that's just going to reinforce our strap so that with all of the pulling when you're carrying the bag, especially if you put heavy stuff in there, it will be reinforced. So let me sew this strap and then I'll come back to sew the X on that. So it shouldn't take me too long to sew this next one. Bit. I don't know if you noticed too, I'm trying to sew the side where the pocket is under first, just to make sure that it stays under there, because once I remove my pins then it's going to be flapping around a little bit. So I've been sewing the inner side of the strap first, and that can just help you avoid the pocket coming out of place, since the pins were holding both the strap and the pocket. Okay, so now I'm on to my fourth and final strap, and then I can sew the X's, and then believe it or not, our bag is almost done. So you could save a little bit of time if you don't do pockets. Also, if you have an embroidery machine, that would be a great time to use it on the pocket. You can personalize for people. So my pocket popped out here, if you can see that. So I'm just going to take my pin out and make sure I put it back in there so it's not popped out. And tote bags can really be made in any size, and if you're looking for a good community service project, I used to have some of my students do this back in Pennsylvania when they would finish, is making a non-food bank bag. So for people who go to a food bank, there's also a non-food bank which gives out toilet paper and stuff like that, and so it's a great service you can do for people, making some tote bags so they can go and pick up those products that they need. So we used to do that and just make a basic tote bag and we donate them. And Now, I don't know how many of you live in California, but we have to pay for grocery bags if you forget yours. They're 10 cents a piece. They're better bags than if you are in other states. So if you don't bring your bag, you have to pay for them, which it took me a while to get used to that. So a lot of people use recyclable ones, although right now, with the coronavirus, they're suggesting nobody bring in reusable bags to the grocery stores, because then you're just bringing stuff in. Okay, so let me just mark the X's on this part real quick, just so that I can make them look nice. Again, I'm giving this to somebody, so I don't want it to look bad. And I don't want it to rip on them. Any marker that you have that's washable. This is one of my favorite pens. I was lucky I found it when I went to the conference last time, but it evaporates in 2 to 10 days, depending on if you wet it or not. And it's purple, so it's sticking out a little bit. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the bottom of my X. I'm going to sew the bottom. Once I get to my stitching, I'm going to pivot and go diagonal. I'm going to go across the top, right where that stitching is, just over top of it. I'm going to go diagonal across and then overlap my stitching on the bottom one more time. Okay, so no back stitching needed because you're going to be overlapping it. So I'm going to sew until I get to the corner. Then I'm going to pivot and make sure my line is diagonal and lined up. I'm going to pivot till I get to the next corner. I think I can do one more stitch. Okay, then we're going to go over top as close as you can to the first stitching you did. My needle needs replaced again. So much mask sewing. Now I'm going to go diagonal this way until I get to the corner. And you don't actually have to draw the diagonal lines once you get used to doing this. And then I'm just going to go along the bottom diagonal again. Cut your threads. Again, no back stitching is needed. You can see my X there. So I'm going to do that on the other 3 strap pieces, and then we'll sew our bag together. So when you pivot, it's just important that your needle stays in the fabric before you lift up your presser foot, or your fabric can move and it won't be in the same place. Okay, so I'm done with that one. I'll trim all my threads off when I'm done. Now I'm going to do this one. Back to the marking pen too, before I forget. If you do have any marking pens, it's actually best to lay them down when you're storing them. I used to put them in, I have a little organizer thing over there, and I used to have them up and down, and then when I just bought a couple of that one I just showed you, the lady I bought them from told me to make sure that I store them laying down, because it just helps them to keep the ink even flowing in them. Joyce has glue ones too that are water soluble, and they have they also have one, I believe, that's blue on one side, which is water soluble, and purple on the other side, which is air soluble. You just have to be careful with the air soluble ones that you sew it before the ink disappears, or you lose your markings. So I'm on my last strap. And I would suggest doing this anytime that you have straps, because it really does help strengthen the straps where they get the most pressure. So now I have all 4 X's done. So let me just trim my threads, and then we're ready to put our bag together. So we're gonna have to sew our outside bag, our inside lining, which I already have done, and then you put the 2 together, and then your bag is actually finished. Now for the next part, you can pin it together if you want to. I'm not going to because I don't think I actually need to pin it. I think it'll pretty much stay where I need it. So what you're going to do is put your bag right sides together. And don't worry about the straps, just make sure they're not sewn in the sides. So I'm going to line up my sides, and I'm going to sew my sides and my bottom at 4/8 seam allowance. Whatever seam allowance you use, you need to make sure you use the same one for the lining. So I'm going to back stitch at the beginning. And again, this doesn't move much, so you really shouldn't have to pin it. And your pieces are already the same size because you cut them together. Back stitch. Okay, now when I do the bottom, I do want to make sure that my straps and everything are lined up with each other, because that's what people are going to notice. So even if that causes some of my other stuff to be off a little bit, I should have checked that. That was the one thing I should have done. So my straps are off a little bit, and I can't make them the same. So they're off a tiny bit, but that's okay. And I should have matched them up before I sewed them. Okay, so I'm going to back stitch. Now, if you wanted to make this tote bag and didn't want to do a lining on it, there's no reason why you actually need a lining. But if you're not doing a lining, you definitely would need to finish the edges. So you'd need to serge or zigzag these. I don't have to do that right now because you're not going to see these once I put the lining in it. So now I'm going to sew this side, back stitch at the beginning. And if I sew from the top down on one side, I always just do the same thing on the other side. I just am in the habit of doing that. Okay, so now the next part has to do with the corners. So this part can be a little tricky if you haven't done it before. So when the bag is like this, you're going to go into each corner of the cutout and you're going to open it up. And then you're going to open your seam allowance from the side and the seam allowance from the bottom. And you're going to make sure that those are matched up with each other. And then I'm just going to put one pin in here just to make sure that that part doesn't move. And then we're going to sew across this, and then that's going to give the bag an actual side and bottom even though it doesn't have separate pieces. Okay? So I'm going to sew, and when I sew this, I'm going to make sure that my seams are open when I do this. So again, same thing, 1/2 inch. Make sure you back stitch. Take your pin out. You could take the time to press these seams open if you want to. I did that with the lining. I didn't do with this just because I feel like this is getting a little long. My poor photographer is holding the camera. So again, when you do the corner, hold this corner piece, open it up, and then you want the one seam allowance open, other seam allowance open. There's a way you can do this without cutting the corner first, but I think this is easier to see. So once you get done with that, again, I'm just going to stick a pin in the middle just to make sure that that stays put and stays lined up. And just make sure it's flat when it's in here. Make sure nothing is tucked underneath. And that was a 2-inch opening, so I'm pretty sure we will have a 3-inch corner. So make sure your seam's open, take out your pin, back stitch. Okay, so now we have our corners. So now I'm going to turn my, actually I'm going to leave this, I'll leave this one inside out, and then the lining I'll turn right side out. So you want to put your straps down inside your bag, and you will repeat with the lining. The lining will go quicker because it doesn't have any pockets unless you want to put pockets on it. Okay, so the lining is the same thing. I'm going to take my lining and turn it right side out, because you have to have your bag right sides together, and we're going to leave a hole to turn it. So I'm going to stick my lining inside my bag, and the two things we want to make sure that are lined up are the side seams. So I have my side seam of my lining, and then the side seam of my outside. Match those two up. I'm going to put a pin in there again just to make sure that it doesn't move, because that'll be noticeable if those aren't matched up with each other. And then I'm just going to put a couple more pins in here just to hold it so I have my edges matched up. I'm going to match up this side. So my sides are matched up. So now I'm just going to put like a pin in here. And so I'm actually going to leave open between these two pins so that I can pull it like through like a pillow. So on this side, I'll probably put, no, 2 pins should be good. Just make sure your straps aren't where you're going to be sewing. So what we're going to do now is we're going to sew around here, leaving that spot open. We want to make sure we back stitch at the beginning and end at this part. We'll pull the bag through, and then you'll top stitch around the top. So at this point, if you want to take your extension cable off your machine, it may help a little bit, because then you can stick your bag around here. It doesn't matter where exactly you leave your opening. So I'm just going to back stitch. I'm not going to pull it all, but I am going to make sure my seam is open when I get to the side. I'm going to take my pin out. Oop. Fix that. Thread broke. Just re-thread it real quick, and then I'll just overlap it. Thread is having a little temper tantrum right now. It's not going in the right spot on the machine. Actually, I'm going to replace my needle real quick while I'm doing this. So when you're not doing super thick stuff, 80-12 should be fine. I just got all these brand new needles, so I'm trying to make sure. Okay, take one out of here. So 80-10 is for medium weight. I got these off of Wawak, if you've ever heard of them. I bought some needles and a zipper. Okay, so there's a round part and a flat part. So the flat part goes away from you. So I'm going to do that. It'll probably take away the clicking. I've been sewing so many masks that I've been going through quite a bunch of needles. There we go. An automatic needle threader. Okay, and my bobbin thread, there's nothing wrong with that one. So I'm just going to move back a little bit before where it broke. And I'm just going to overlap it. Seems like my one piece is a tiny bit bigger than the other, so I might have a tiny pucker, but okay. Now I'm towards the end where my opening needs to be, so I'm going to take that pin out. You only need about probably 4 or 5 inches. Okay, so I've sewed the whole way around the top. And there's my opening there. I made sure I back stitch. So now you're going to reach your hand into the opening and you're going to turn it right side out. You have to be careful when you do this that you don't tear where your back stitching is, because sometimes when if you have too small of a hole and you push it through too much at a time, you can end up tearing and stretching out that part. So when you turn it right side out, you have your bag and then you have your lining. So now we're going to push our lining into the bag. So we have our square corners. Everything should fit in there. And so my opening is right here. So I'm going to give the top a quick press just so that everything looks nice, so that when I top stitch, I don't really have to pin it and it'll look nicer. So a trick that I do when I'm trying to do something like this is that I actually open it even though the seam's there and I'm going to put on the edge. If you press it while it's open like this, then you'll actually get a nicer result in the end. So I'm just putting it wherever just so that I can get it in there to press it, to open it up, and then that basically opens up the seam to get it to look a lot nicer. I know it's probably hard to see. And where your opening is, if you did a good job, those should just also kind of open up and fold in there. If not, you can fold them in a second when we come back to that part. Pressing and getting good at pressing will make your items look so much more professional from those who don't press. So you definitely want to do a good job pressing. So I open it, so now it is sitting really nice where the black and white meet each other. So I'm just making sure my seam's on the edge. And I'm going to press it around so when I top stitch, everything will be sitting there good and I won't really have to pin anything. And you shouldn't even really be able to tell where your opening was. Although I think one of my fabrics definitely stretched a little, or my seams weren't exact. Sometimes people will do a little accent part by when they press it. You could leave a little border of the white so that you could actually see it, and that adds a little bit of an accent. I'm not going to actually do that though. Okay, so I'm at my opening, so I just have to take a little bit with extra time right at the opening just to make sure that everything gets pressed nice there. That's where my opening was there, but you can't even see anything. So now I'm gonna go ahead and top stitching. So top stitching is stitching that you end up seeing. They do have special needles if you want to do a special kind of top stitching. I'm just gonna do a regular top stitching. I'm gonna do it 1/4 from the edge, and I'm just trying to make sure that my black and my white are even. Again, anytime you're sewing a circle, you don't have to back stitch because you'll overlap your beginning and end. And just make sure your straps are out of the way of where the sewing is actually happening. So I'm going to get a teeny tiny little pucker there because my black is a little bigger than my white. I could have gone back and fixed it. So I'm just guiding it through, making sure that my top edge of my bag is lined up with the presser foot. And again, make sure your straps are definitely out of the way where the stitching is going to be. I'm almost back to my beginning. So I'm back at my beginning, so I'm just going to overlap the beginning by about 1/2 inch. So you can see I started here, I went the whole way around and ended there. So I want to make sure I cut my threads off, and then our bag is done. Sometimes the extra threads from the beginning and end get looped back in there, so just make sure you do a good job trimming. So there is our Mommy and Me tote bag. Nice size straps, nice big pocket in the front, pocket in the back. And good luck to all of you who comment that you watch this by 8 p.m. tonight Pacific time. And I will pick a random winner, and whoever wins, I'll send you the bag. Have a good night.